Hey everyone, Dalton Perrine here, and I welcome you to this video here today. I hope you're all having a great day, and I hope you guys are also having a great rest of the year, getting to spend time with your families, and as we get right into the new year with 2020, hopefully you guys are enjoying it yourselves. So in today's video, we're going to be talking about the battle of activity versus material in the in-game phase of chess. And we're going to get to see how Magnus Carlsen is able to apply it in his own game, and then we're also going to get to see how one of my own personal students was able to apply this exact same concept in their own game, and they were able to get a really good position and eventually go on to win the game. Now, after looking at how my student applied the concept in his game, then we're going to get to see a final position, which is going to end up being an exercise for all of you viewers at home to watch, and I'm sure you guys will get the chance to solve that position, especially because you'll have gotten some of the tips throughout the video that help you to get the right answer. Okay, so let's go ahead and get right. So our first position here on the board is taken from the third round game of the 2018 unofficial Fischer Random World Championship match, and this was played between Grandmasters Hikaru Nakamura and Magnus Carlsen. Now, throughout this game, White has been pressing for quite a bit, and he seems to have the advantage here, especially in regards to having the better pawn structure and also the active rook and knight. We can see that at the moment, Black has isolated pawn on h4. He's got a pair of doubled isolated pawns on the f-file, isolated d6 pawn. White only has, I guess one isolated pawn himself, but the main thing is the activity difference that we're seeing here. White's knight is very nicely centralized, and White's rook is also on an open file. Compare that to each of Black's pieces, other than the knight on c5. Black's pieces are not looking very good at this point. So White's most recent move in the game was knight to e4 in this position. And now Black has to figure out what he's going to do here. So I would actually recommend you, if you wanted to, go ahead and pause the video, think about what you would do if you're in Black's shoes, and then unpause the video and see what you would, we're going to see what happened in the game here between Magnus Carlsen and Hikaru Nakamura. Okay, so hopefully you had the chance to pause the video. So in this position, we ultimately see that, and this goes along with the topic of the day, the topic here being, again, activity versus material in the endgame. So at this point, the material is actually even. Both sides are equal material, 6 pawns each, 2 minor pieces, and 2 rooks. However, there are some threats that White has at the moment. First of all, in this position here, White is simply threatening to take the f6 pawn for free. And White is also threatening to take the knight on e4 2 times and win a pawn there on the c5 square. Now, the problem from Black's perspective is there's, some annoying issues here for him. If this knight on c5 moves away, it's going to give White the fully open control of the file here, and White's going to be able to invade down the c file and probably throw a check on the c8 square. For instance, if Black makes the move knight takes e4, White can actually here just go ahead and instantly make this check on c8. He can do this before recapturing the knight. The king is going to have to move away somewhere. White can take back on e4, and we can really see once again the comparison on the activity scale here. White's rook is actually completely shutting down Black's queenside pieces, pinning the bishop to the rook, and it's very difficult for Black to untangle here. I guess he'd have to play something like rook h8, and then maybe at this point White could trade, but then he's going to activate his knight here pretty quickly, probably something like knight to d3, king to e2, rook to c1, and again, because White has the better pawn structure here, it's going to be the case where Black is probably fighting for a draw, and White's probably got the advantage in a case like this. So the first kind of step here is we really don't want to allow White's activity to get more than it already is at this point. But again, if we're, if we have these threats to meet, how do we deal with it? What do we do? If Black plays knight to d7, it's almost as bad as what we just saw a moment ago. This check's gonna happen. The king's gonna have to come up to e7. In this case, if you go to g7, you can take the pawn due to the bishop being pinned. So the king's gonna have to come up to e7, and then after something such as knight to d3, for instance, it's very tough for Black really to move a muscle here, barely. So that's why in the game here, it might seem like a bit of a desperation kind of idea. However, Black decided in the game to play the move king to g7. And you might think here, well, okay, how is that actually, what was that doing? It's getting the king a little bit off the back rank, but can't White just take the knight on c5 and win the pawn there? Well, yes, he can. That is true. White did actually in the game end up capturing twice on c5, and white is up a pawn. But the key here is figuring out, for black especially, how he can increase his own piece activity here. Because previously we saw how bad the bishop was. It could barely move. The rook was on a in the corner. Now in this kind of situation, at the very least, the bishop has a wide open diagonal, and the bishop can create some counterplay. It can actually get off the back rank and get into the game here. So that's going to kind of be the way, this is the way the game went. There is also another idea, if we go back to the kind of starting off position here, another idea that black could have played to maybe try to gain some activity, maybe without necessarily giving up material, was maybe an idea like rook to h5. Rook to h5 has activity in the form of attacking the pawn on d5. White could, of course, still take on c5 twice and defend the pawn. But then again, as we'll see in the game also, bishop a7 hitting the rook, or maybe bishop d6 hitting the rook. And he's going to try to kick the rook away from protecting the d5 pawn. Something like this, for example, could actually go to show that white's actually in big trouble all of a sudden. His own rook is trapped, b5's a threat, rook takes d5's on the table, and all of a sudden it's actually white that's fighting for a draw. If anything, white's probably lost at this point. So rook h5 is another idea here, going after the pawn. If white took on f6 in this case instead of taking on c5, then black could play rook to f5, kicking the knight back, probably back to g4 or e4 or something like that. Well, of course, not e4 because you'll take the knight to the pin. So he'd probably go back to g4 here, and then black could pick up d5, and he's not even down material in this particular situation. So that's just another option. It wasn't played in the game, but just kind of an interesting possibility. In the game, though, instead, he played the move king g7, protecting the pawn on f6. And Hikaru Nakamura did capture twice on c5, winning the pawn here. However, once again, despite being down a pawn in this position, black is going to get some counterplay, and he's going to get some activity very quickly at this point. So in the game, black now continued with bishop a7. And we're going to see a key theme here. Whenever you are down material in chess, especially at the endgame, but really at any phase of the game, you want to try to create as much counterplay, create as many threats, make checks, make forcing moves, try to keep the opponent on the defensive, because if you allow them to untangle their pieces, if you allow them to kind of catch up in the position, and kind of, in this case, if white could move the knight, king, and rook off the back rank, and keep the extra pawn, black is simply going to be worse. So after bishop a7, the rook moved away to c3, and then here comes rook h5 attacking the d pawn. So another threat at this point. Not really giving white time to get his king off the back rank or the knight off the back rank. And so we can white now plays the move rook to d3, protecting the pawn, and black makes the move rook to e5. Now you may think, why not just play another forcing move? Why not play rook to d8, going after the pawn? But this is another situation from white's perspective, where white could actually decide to give back the pawn that he's ahead in order to get his own development going and getting his own activity. He could play something such as king e2. If black takes the pawn, he might end up trading rooks. And then knight to d3. And it's back even in material. Both sides have 5 pawns. But again, black has kind of the long-term disadvantage, primarily because of the poor pawn structure. White will now play things like rook to c1, get on the open c-file, probably look to play something like maybe rook to c4, maybe even rook over to f4 at some point. He could try to target the weaknesses in black's position. And the main thing is, again, he's been able to get his own activity. So a big thing we're seeing here, and this will also kind of be brought out in some bullet points a little later, is that there are some situations where you may actually decide to not win back material because you want to keep the opponent kind of cooped up or keep them restricted as much as you can. So instead of going after that d-pawn, though, black instead made the move rook to e5. He's actually limiting the king from moving. We can see that the king cannot move anywhere at this point. Only the knight and the rook can move, and because of that, black is going to increase his own activity and try to really make it difficult for white to untangle. Despite being down a pawn, black is doing pretty well here. So white played the move f4 in the game, trying to kick the rook off the active e5 square. Black simply plays rook up to e4, attacking the pawn, and white now plays knight f3. This is another situation, once again, kind of like the rook d8 going after the d-pawn, where black could take the pawn on f4. However, once again, the difference here is that white's going to be able to get his king off the back rank. Might throw in a check, king to d2. He's going to be able to get his rook off the corner, and he's going to be able to kind of get himself back into the game, at least in regards to activating his pieces. So instead of that, though, black focuses again on kind of keeping white cooped up and restricted. He doesn't actually leave the rook from e4. He plays the move rook to c8. A very strong move here, grabbing the initiative or continuing to use the initiative here, creating a mate threat. Rook to c1 check. White can block with a couple of pieces, but then he'll just take each of them, and the king's going to get mated. So this is a pretty big threat. Of course, white needs to answer this threat, and so white played the move rook to c3. White is willing once again. He's happy to trade off one of black's active rooks, especially if black did something like trade the rooks and then take on f4. Once again, white would play king e2. He gets the king off the back rank, gets the rook in the game, and it's a pretty balanced back and forth type game. Instead, though, once again, Magnus Carlsen being trying to focus more so on keeping his own activity going and not letting the opponent get into the game, he decides to decline the rook trade and move the rook over to e8. And now there are very big ideas of rook to e2, followed by rook f2, and mate would be probably coming pretty soon at that point, or at least winning a lot of material. White now plays the move rook to c2 to prevent the rook e2 move, and only now does black capture the pawn. And you can see the big difference here. When he captures the pawn in this case, white cannot play the move king to e2. He actually still can't move the king at all because of the bishop and rook coordinating well together. So the key is he's only taking the material when it's not allowing the opponent to activate his pieces. Black was willing to kind of leave the material on the board, not take it, if capturing the material allowed his opponent to kind of untangle his position. Now, as the game went along, we're going to kind of fast forward a little bit. White played d6, black played rook to d8. Now he is willing to actually go ahead material in this case to stop the pawn. Plus, he also kind of had to stop it anyways, or else it was going to push far down the board. But another option even here could have been something like rook e6, attacking the pawn from the side and keeping the e-file under control. If white tries to play something like rook to d2, now we swing the other rook back to the c-file, and there's again these rook c1 checkmate ideas. White might have to play rook to d1, and then black plays rook to e4. There's ideas once again of, if the pawn goes to d7, rook to c2, aiming for mate threats. Different ideas like that are still in the air. So even in this case, black could have decided to kind of continue focusing on that activity, but he played rook d8 in the game instead. And after rook to d2, rook to e4, keeping the king kind of inactive. Though white is now able to play d7, f5, and then a very important move for white is to play g3 here. g3 trying to free up the g2 square for the king. He really has to prioritize getting his king off the back rank so that he can get his rook in the game. And as the game goes along, it actually ends up being a game that turns into a draw because white actually, did pretty good on his own to create his own activity here, despite he's going to be down upon himself pretty soon here. But his own activity was able to kind of turn the game around a little bit, and eventually the game was drawn a bit later. There were some trades along the G and F pawns. Not going to go into too much on the details here, but black eventually decided to do a perpetual check, moving the rook back and forth between h5 and g5, and that secured the draw here. So key thing from this game, from this first game example that we're going to want to pick on, is that you don't necessarily have to focus on winning material. Winning material is not necessarily the goal of chess. It is nice to be ahead material, but there are definitely situations where you can be behind on material and have the better position because you have better activity, or you can be, on the flip side of the coin, you can be ahead material and have the worst position because your pieces are very much bottled up. So you have to find the balance between activity and material. This is especially the case in the endgame. Many endgames are drawn because one of your own pieces are very active, even though you're down material. Other endgames end up being a win because your pieces are very active, even though, you're down material. Different things like that. So this is our first example. Again, this is Magnus Carlsen showcasing, as well as actually Hikaru Nakamura also doing a good job himself, showcasing how to play, focusing more on activity compared to just purely going after material. willing to give up material in order to get that activity, and we can kind of look to emulate this in our own games. So with that in mind, let's actually turn over to one of my students' games that's going to showcase how he was able to focus on this kind of battle of activity versus material. We'll kind of focus on his example here next. So let's go ahead and get into his example. And that's this one here on the board. Okay, so in this position here, it's White's move right now. White seems to have a very nice position. He's got the rook on the 7th rank. The knight on d6 is on a terrific outpost. The bishop on c2 is on a nice diagonal, keeping the rook protected. And it is White's move here. He is down a pawn, though. White has 4 pawns, Black has 5, so we're actually down a little material at the moment. So go ahead and pause the video. I'd encourage you to do that once again. Pause the video and see if you can come up with a plan or what you would work to do in White's shoes here in this kind of position. So go ahead and pause and see what you come up with. Okay, so hopefully you paused the video and got the chance to think about it here. So in this position, what would we do? Well, kind of based on the game we just saw between Magnus Carlsen and Hikaru Nakamura, we want to focus in a position like this on this aspect of activity versus being overly focused on material. So in this position, it's very easy to do something like, okay, I see the pawn on h4. I can capture the pawn on h4. Why don't I just take the pawn? However, the downside of taking the pawn in this kind of position here is that it is a bit of a materialistic grab. And it's not like really this pawn was going anywhere. This pawn was going to probably be kind of a goner pretty soon anyways. But what this allows Black to do is it gives him kind of free time to untangle his position. So for example, after rook takes h4, Black could play a move like knight to a6, attacking the pawn on c5. We might do something like, maybe throw in a check and then rook g5 to guard the pawn. But then again, Black can focus on his own activity here. He can play knight to b4, attacking the bishop and the pawn. We might go bishop b1 to guard both. And then all of a sudden, the knight shows up on the d5 square. And White probably is still a bit better here. I think overall, White's pieces are still more active. But why would we even allow the knight in the first place to go all the way from the very passive b8 square to this much, improved square on the d5 square? We don't really need to allow this. Even though we probably are still, objectively a little bit better here. Let's back up, though. Instead of simply going after the pawn, what could we do instead? Well, this is a position that we want to, again, focus on our activity. There's actually a couple of different things we might be able to come up with doing here. There might be some mating nets, depending on how Black defends against it. We do actually, the king doesn't have a whole lot of squares to move to. And another key idea here is we have all of our pieces activated aside from the king. Our king on g2, it's not bad necessarily, but it could be better. So 2 main moves that that I'd be thinking about in this kind of position would be something like king h3. Instead of using the rook to take the pawn, I actually want the king to take the pawn so that I can get the king farther up the board and maybe set up some mating nets. And another idea here may be the move bishop to g6, because once you play bishop to g6, there might be some knight rerouting ideas for, again, some checkmating attacks. The reason we're looking for these attacks and for these kind of checkmate nets is because, again, our pieces are just much more active, and we want to try to keep the opponent from getting the activity here. This is a case where, again, the bishop's pinned, the rook really has nowhere active to move to, and as we saw, the only way Black can really get activity, at least easily, is with this knight a6, take the pawn or go to b4, and then into d5, like these kind of nice squares, squares that the knight can jump on. Okay, so let's say, for example, we start off, though, instead of taking on h4, we're going to take on h4 with the king. So let's say we go something like king h3 first. What might Black do here? Well, it's kind of hard to recommend anything. If he tries, again, a move like knight a6, well, we could simply take on h4, but there's even maybe other like mating net ideas here once again. Maybe we can do like a knight e8. This actually ends up working because of the pin on the bishop. We're now threatening to simply take the bishop, followed by the check, or check and then take the bishop. So Black might, take on c5. This protects the bishop. But then this is where some of those mating nets come into play. Knight f6 check, king f8, bishop to g6 now. threatening rook f7 checkmate. And really the only way to stop this is by moving the bishop. He has to play something like bishop e8. Or maybe he could throw an e5 check. We take the pawn, then bishop e6 or something. But then we're just going to take the rook, and we're simply ahead of whole rook with an easily winning position. If he does bishop to e8, I guess at the very least we'll take the rook. He'll get the bishop. We could probably play something like knight d7 check to trade off the knights. And white should win this endgame pretty easily here. He's going to pick up the h-pawn. His rook is on the 7th rank, which is very strong. Probably just take the pawn, walk the king into the game, and really shouldn't be too difficult to win here as long as he keeps the rook on the 7th rank, probably. So this is showing how, we could start off with king h3. If the knight starts moving around, we can play like knight e8. Part of the reason knight e8 immediately is maybe not as good, I will say, is because black could play rook to b7, and now the bishop can go to c8 and protect the rook. So, for example, if we try bishop g6 now, or if we try knight f6 check, and then bishop g6, notice in this case the knight's protecting the bishop. If we try bishop g6 here, black can now play bishop to c8, and the rook protects the f7 mate, and the rook's also defended. So this is actually a case of, well, we've kind of tried to set up the mate net, but the problem is black can kind of defend against it. And keep in mind, we're still down a pawn. So that's part of the reason rushing for knight e8 doesn't work. But let's look at king h3. So king h3, if black tries, let's say, the difference is he doesn't have rook b7 or bishop c8 ideas because the knight covers b7. So let's say he goes rook c7. Well, we can simply take the pawn. If he tries like knight a6 now or something, we can actually, again, just kind of ignore this pawn. We don't need to play rook h5. We don't really need to keep that pawn. We could play king g5. Black takes the pawn. Probably going to have some mating ideas here pretty soon. I think rook f7 is the most accurate way to play because now we have ideas of bishop check, king in the corner, king h6, followed by like a rook f8 mate. And black tries to play rook a7, check here, king h6, threatening the mate. If black goes here, we can now simply move the rook anywhere. We'll be threatening knight f7 mate. We can play something like rook f3, threatening knight f7 mate. And if the bishop tries to cover f7, the problem is that the rook is the bishop's blocking off the rook. We can now go to f8 and still get mate. So notice it here. It's the piece activity once again. We took the h4 pawn in this case with the king, but we didn't rush after taking it with the rook, especially if it's going to come at the cost of lowering our own piece activity in the process. And then the other idea I mentioned earlier was also maybe something like bishop g6. Bishop g6 first. If black plays something like, again, maybe knight a6, now we can play these knight e4 ideas because the difference is the bishop's not being blocked by the knight, it's protecting the rook. And knight f6 followed by rook f7 is a very strong mate threat here that black can't avoid without losing material. If instead maybe he plays like e5 or something, we have to be a little careful in some of these cases because bishop h3 check followed by rook takes h7 is an idea. But we could play maybe, let's say rook f7. That way the rook's protected twice, so moving the bishop doesn't do anything. Maybe black again plays knight a6. And then we can do something like check here. And I think maybe moving the knight, bishop g6, rook f8, something like that once again is going to be very strong at this point. Again, though, the key is we're trying to avoid bishop h3. So if we try like bishop g6, I guess black could even go back to c8 or something like that. But yeah, I think the most accurate way to play here is knight f5. And black is in a lot of trouble if he takes the pawn. Bishop g6, ideas like this could be a bit dangerous for black. Maybe even something more accurate. Maybe knight e7 is the way to go, because now you threaten knight g6. So black is in quite a bit of trouble here, and we would be winning at this point as well. So a couple of different ways to kind of prioritize, again, that piece activity over the fact of kind of protecting, going after the h4 pawn immediately, trying to focus on improving the activity instead of just taking the pawn. And especially if we take the pawn, it allows the opponent to get activity. Now, let's say, though, again, like down the road, let's say we kind of reach a position like this again. Let's kind of fast forward just as an example here. And let's say a position like this arises. So in this position here, it's white's move. we could think, let's be a little materialistic and play something like king takes e6, or maybe rook b7 and go after the b pawn. But this is another spot where we can actually just focus on our own activity, and we're going to get a win pretty quickly here. We could simply play king f6, followed by king g6, and back rank mates are going to be very difficult for the opponent to stop here. If he tries something like rook f3 check, king g8, now we're threatening rook d8 mate. Black might try to stop that. But then we can simply play knight f7 check, knight h6 check, and rook to h7 mate. So this is, again, another situation where instead of being materialistic, instead of just, let me take the e6 pawn, let me go after the b pawn, taking e6, for example, you allow the knight to start coming closer to the game and maybe making some checks. If you try to go to f6 now, black can throw in a check, and then maybe another check or something like that. We're allowing that activity once again at the cost, or we're allowing the activity by taking the pawn on e6 in this kind of case. But if we play king f6 and king g6, white keeps a very much better position and doesn't really allow the opponent to get any of that counterplay. So again, throughout these examples here, we're seeing some very key lessons. Let's kind of put these lessons here in bullet point form. So let me kind of pull up the bullet point that we're going to see here. So once again, these are 4 bullet points that we picked up on throughout these 2 games so far. The first bullet point here says, winning material does not guarantee that you're going to win the game. So as we've seen here, there were situations where one player was ahead in material and they didn't win the game. They didn't have the better position because of it. There were situations where you're behind in material and you do have the better game because of the activity, once again, because of the way the game is playing out. The second bullet point here says, giving up material or some material in return for activity can be worth it if you get enough counterplay in return. So kind of the same thing we've seen in some of these cases. You can give up a pawn in order to activate your own pieces. Sometimes it's better to be behind on material with activity than being ahead in material with no activity. That kind of goes right along with the third bullet point here. Once again, it's the exact same thing here. Sometimes it's better to not win material if it means that the opponent's going to get activity themselves. So if we win a pawn, but it allows the opponent to untangle their pieces, if it allows them to activate their pieces, you have to judge that. You have to take that pretty seriously. It might still be worth it to win the material, but it also might not be worth it if the opponent's able to get enough counterplay that causes you problems. And then the fourth and final bullet point here, try to keep the opponent as passive and constricted as possible. If you are, that doesn't really matter whether you're ahead or behind on material. Even if you're ahead, try to keep them restricted. But especially if you're behind and you have this advantage in activity, you really don't want to let them untangle. You don't want to let them kind of unbottle themselves and get themselves back into the game, at least in the activity kind of department. Okay, so we've seen these first 2 game examples. Let's go ahead and put the kind of puzzle or exercise position for you guys here on the board. And this is going to kind of round off the video. Let me just put it on the board. And so in this position, it's black's move right now. And it's up to you guys to figure out what you think the best way for black to play is. It's not necessarily just a one-move type thing. It might just kind of be like an overall plan. Once again, trying to apply some of the things that we've learned in this particular video. So I'm going to leave this for you guys as a puzzle kind of exercise position. The first person to get what I would kind of deem as the right answer, or at least come up with a good reason behind their move and kind of following in line with the ideas we've seen in this video, the first person to post that in the comments below on the YouTube video is going to get kind of a shout out in the next video. I'll mention them and say that they got the right answer and stuff like that. So make sure that you comment, make sure that you answer the try to find the best move in the position, and you might get a shout out in the next. Okay, so that's it for this video. Thanks for watching it. If you enjoyed the video, then don't forget to give it a thumbs up here on YouTube. Click the subscribe button and ring the bell notification to get an alert when my next video gets posted. I'm going to be trying to upload these videos more consistently, trying to do a couple a week or something like that. And the more you guys enjoy it, the more I'll be wanting to put more videos out. So if you're interested in coaching for myself, then check out nextlevelchesscoaching.com using the link in the description below the video. That is it for this video, though. Hope you guys have a great rest of the day, and I will see you guys around in the next video. Okay, talk with you guys later.